I'm Ben Lark and I'm a student at the University of New England. At the moment I'm taking the Bachelor's of Psychological Science, and in particular I'm taking the Behaviour Modification unit. In this short video I'm going to be outlining some of the principles of behaviour modification. In particular I'm going to look at smoking modification, the modification of smoking behaviour, with a view to trying to explain how you might support yourself or someone else to quit smoking behaviour and to remain as a non-smoker afterwards. So the first thing we're going to look at is what actually is behaviour modification. Behaviour modification, surprisingly enough, possibly looks at behaviour. It provides an emphasis on measuring the dimensions of what we say and what we do. It identifies what's happening in the here and now and defines target behaviours in terms of excesses and deficits. These are obviously what we would like to see less or more of. Behaviour modification has a particular focus on what it refers to as the ABC approach. This acronym is broken down into antecedents, into behaviours and consequences. Antecedents are the controlling variables that give rise to a particular behaviour. B obviously stands for the behaviour itself, whereas C represents the consequences. These are the outcomes of behaviour, the products that reinforce the behaviour and make it more likely to occur in the future. So, smoking, it's obviously a behavioural excess. That's a behaviour that we see too much of and we would like to reduce. So how do we reduce it? Well, the first stage is assessment. Any behavioural intervention needs to be based on an assessment. An assessment recognises the fact that behaviour is complex, it's multifaceted, and we're working with people in the real world, which means that there's a rich environment surrounding people with many variables that are interacting all the time. So we need to discern what's important to our client, to the person who's smoking. What are the antecedents that trigger their behaviour? Now, the primary information, the first way that we go about understanding this is from an interview where we spend time with our client, we talk to them about their smoking behaviour, and we closely listen to the factors that are defined as critical in this behaviour by them. The further information that we might get during this assessment phase is from monitoring their actual behaviour in the real world over a baseline period. Now, this might be a period of a week, it might be longer, it's something that's determined between yourself and the client, but you need to look at frequency, particularly during this period of baseline assessment. Now, frequency in this case is the number of times that you see a behaviour, and when we're talking about smoking, possibly the easiest frequency to measure is that of smoking cigarettes. So you might ask the subject to gather information about the number of cigarettes they're smoking on a daily basis, particular times of the day in which they smoke, particular environments in which they smoke, but you can also ask them to record information about other antecedents that are contributing to the smoking behaviour. Now, these antecedents might be expressed as feelings, ways in which they're feeling prior to smoking. There might be other antecedent variables such as who's present when they exhibit the smoking behaviour. And you'd also ask them to record post the behaviour, so after having smoked a cigarette, how their feelings might have changed as a result of the smoking behaviour. Now, to do this, the simplest way is obviously to develop a data sheet which collects this information. It's something that you'd design with inputs from the client, and you would ask them to complete on a daily basis, recording each smoking incidence of smoking and all of the variables that I've just outlined. So, after completing the behavioural assessment, the next phase in this behaviour modification program is that of intervention. During the intervention, you're going to be modifying the behaviour itself, and it's important at the outset to set clear goals with your client. This might be about the number of cigarettes smoked. You may be looking at a program where you decide to reduce the number of cigarettes smoked gradually, but it's important to have clearly defined numbers involved in that process. You might also be working on considering nicotine replacement to alleviate some of the physical symptoms that can arise from reducing the amount of nicotine which is being taken in. You might also want to talk to your client about reducing their exposure to associative stimuli. Those are things that enable, in a way, the smoking activity to carry on and are associated in the client's mind with smoking. So other drugs such as coffee and alcohol are commonly associated with smoking. There might also be some venues, environments in which it's more common for your client to smoke, and so you might want to encourage them to reduce the amount of visits they make to such venues. Try to identify some alternative behaviours that have the same outcomes as smoking for the individual concerned, but are more adaptive, more healthy. So if you're dealing with a client who has been a social smoker or defines himself as such, then you may want to encourage them to adapt more healthful behaviours such as joining a sports club or so forth that can have social outcomes for them. If you're working with someone who is smoking a lot because it's related to anxiety reduction for them, then you may want to encourage them to adapt some behaviours which have an outcome in reducing the level of anxiety that they're experiencing, such as taking a relaxation class or beginning a practice of meditation that may help to relax them in their own home. Now, key to all of these stages, and key in fact to having these kind of clear goals at the outset, is developing a behavioural contract with your client. This is a formal statement, this is an undertaking if you like, which elaborates all of the kind of aspects of behavioural change that I've just talked about. It's something that will be signed by yourself and by your client. It will be an undertaking on their part to commit to this course of intervention. Another key aspect of this intervention phase is of course the monitoring, how we go about gathering the data on the smoking behaviour during this phase of behavioural change. Now, one of the most effective ways to do this or to achieve this is on a daily basis. This allows you to have some very efficient data gathering. It also provides you, as the person supporting the client in this setting, more opportunities to reinforce their changing behaviour, to give them more reassurance, particularly if they've experienced a lapse, and to emphasise their overall positive progress on the course. So, having completed the intervention with your client and assuming that they've either achieved some significant degree of reduction of the smoking behaviour or in fact they've managed to quit smoking, a key aspect for you in your relationship to them will be in providing follow-up services. This is a very important phase in terms of maintaining the gains that they've made. It's very important, particularly with smoking, to secure follow-up and to secure abstinence from smoking behaviour, because research has shown that in events where smokers return to smoking having failed to quit, this reinforces the belief in their minds that the failure is an inevitable consequence of quitting, and it can undermine their future willpower to actually quit smoking. So consider weekly check-ins. You might want to step those up to monthly, depending on your schedule and availability, and remind them that if there is relapse into smoking, that it's not the same thing as failing. Everyone has a bad day. It doesn't mean you have to return to full-fledged smoking, and you shouldn't consider yourself as having failed at the program just because you've smoked one or a number of cigarettes. You should also look for continuation of the adaptive activities that were started in the intervention. You want those to continue as much as possible, and you want to encourage your client to see this as a new chapter rather than as a brief intervention that secured a short-term gain.